My dear readers, let us now turn to episode 414 of Jordan Peterson's podcast. Where do we begin with this convoluted tangle of verbosity masquerading as profundity? The episode in question, a veritable marathon of psychological and philosophical meanderings, seemed less an exploration of the meaning crisis and more a symptom of it. The so-called Dr. Peterson and Dr. Vervaeke embarked on what could only be described as a highfalutin escapade through a jungle of jargon, where the machete of clarity was evidently left behind. Peterson, with his penchant for archetypal ramblings, and Vervaeke, with his academic verbiage, together concocted a stew of ideas so richly dense that even the most ardent of intellectual gourmands might find it indigestible. The conversation, if one could charitably call it that, oscillated between abstract theorizations about biblical narratives and neuropsychological jargon, leaving one to wonder if the duo was more interested in showcasing their erudition rather than genuinely unraveling the threads of the meaning crisis. And then there was the matter of the philosophical Silk Road, a term so laden with pretense that it threatened to collapse under its weight. The concept, presumably a grandiose metaphor for the intellectual journey on which they embarked, instead came across as a self-congratulatory pat on the back for navigating the murky waters of their own creation. In their quest to address the meaning crisis, Peterson and Vervaeke appeared to inadvertently contribute to it by cloaking simple ideas in complex terminology. The irony of two intellectuals discussing the accessibility of meaning while ensconced in a tower of Babel of their own making would not be lost on the astute observer. Like two overzealous actors on a stage, our esteemed interlocutors seemed to forget the audience they were performing for. The conversation, a supposedly profound analysis of the meaning crisis, transformed into an exhibition of intellectual self-gratification. One moment they delved into the labyrinthine depths of neuropsychological theories, with Vervaeke's elaborations on trauma and Janov Bollmann's shattered assumption model, which, though intriguing, strayed into realms so abstract that any semblance of practical application was lost in the ether. Then, in a bewildering pivot, Peterson waxed poetic about biblical narratives and archetypal ideals, attempting to tether these grandiose concepts to everyday reality, yet only succeeding in adding more layers to an already impenetrable fog of discourse. In the grand finale of this pseudo-intellectual circus, Peterson and Vervaeke danced a tango of confusion, prancing around substantive discourse with the grace of a drunken philosopher. Take, for instance, their foray into the idea of hyperpriors and entropy control theories of Friston. The duo, embroiled in a self-indulgent symposium, seemed blissfully unaware of the logical morass into which they were sinking. Their discussion, ostensibly about neuropsychological principles, quickly devolved into a muddled mess of jargon, each trying to outdo the other in the complexity of their explanations. The concept of hyperpriors, potentially a valuable tool in understanding cognitive processes, was bandied about with such cavalier disregard for clarity that one might mistake it for an incantation rather than a scientific term. Moreover, Peterson's attempt to weave biblical narratives into the discussion, ostensibly to provide a framework for understanding the sacred, instead came across as a haphazard conflation of unrelated concepts. His references to Dante and Milton in the same breath as neuropsychology smacked of intellectual showboating rather than a sincere attempt at interdisciplinary synthesis. The discussion teetered on the edge of becoming a farcical display of name-dropping, each reference more ostentatious than the last. The conversation's nadir, however, was their treatment of the concept of sacredness and its relation to the neuropsychological. Vervaeke's proposition of sacredness as a process tied to cognitive states of awe was met with Peterson's half-baked musings on dopamine-mediated revelation. The dialogue, instead of enlightening, became an exercise in mental gymnastics, each trying to outmaneuver the other with fanciful theories that lacked empirical grounding or logical coherence.